Folk rock. Popular music resembling or derived from folk music but incorporating the stronger beat of rock music and using electric instruments. Although this may be the definition, a genre is made up of much more than a few words that Google tells us. I'm going to take you through the journey of this genre, breaking it down into the two main aspects and then bringing them back together through their cultural impacts and the music that brings the genre itself to life. Let's start with the basics of what folk rock is. Folk rock is the musical hybrid of, you guessed it, folk and rock. The merging of tradition and modernisation that arose from the 1960s is still very prevalent in today's music. In order to fully understand this genre, I'm going to break it in half, revealing the heritage behind the two eponymous aspects, beginning with folk. The term folk isn't specific to music and often relates to many different art forms or simply just a tradition. If you go back far enough, you could say that the origins of folk stem from the songs and rhymes sung by agricultural workers to spread seeds of good morale whilst carrying out everyday work tasks, pun intended. However, this is far too long ago to focus on for a contemporary music course, so I'm going to bring you into the 20th century and the lead up to the First World War. The British folk revival began in the English Folk Dance and Song Society based in Cecil Sharp House. These musicians were desperately attempting to eliminate all German influence from British music, but focusing on the little native music that Brits have. This music tended to differ in some ways to the original working class background, as it focused on societal status, family and friends, which was continued after the Second World War, because not only was Britain itself left in a state of destruction and despair, but politics were in a similar situation, resulting in the end of Churchill's power as society was crying out for a change. Folk music played a huge part over the next decade after this time because it brought back camaraderie and happiness. Meanwhile, in America, the folk revival was in full swing, serving the same purpose after the Great Depression, producing musicians such as Woody Guthrie, who is still a huge influence on some of today's folk rock musicians. In the late 50s, American folk music was upbeat and full of hearty string instruments like banjos and mandolins, whereas the Brits kept their music stripped back and tended to be a cappella. The British style coincided with the locations folk music began to grow, as clubs would crop up all over Britain, encouraging an open mic night style performance. Anyone who turned up was welcome to play and sing whatever they wanted. Anne Briggs reflected this style, as she was known for taking old British sea shanties and transforming them into beautiful love songs of purity. Another musician found in these clubs was Bob Dylan, who performed his own take on Woody Guthrie songs at the time. Whilst folk music was gaining momentum in the UK, another genre was growing alongside it, blues. After the Second World War, music had been changed. The American Army arrived in the UK and many GIs were sent to live with civilians across the country, bringing their new music and technology. The upbeat big band music grew in the UK, encouraging people to dance with the horns and enthusiastic vocals. People began to take from this music and transform their own into blues style. As for technology, radio became prominent. It was no longer a form of war-related communication, but a source of communication amongst society for music and news. The vinyl record was also introduced as a brand new, much more reliant form of recording and playing music that brought the UK to light. I know what you're thinking. What relevance does this have to folk rock? Well, blues was the birth of rock. The strong beats and emotional vocals developed into the now well-known and loved genre that is rock and roll. As the years went on, technology grew in almost every way it could. However, with music, this growth had mixed reviews and caused a lot of controversy amongst musicians and audiences. Electric guitars were introduced to music, creating louder and cleaner sounds. Whereas some fully embraced this new technology, others rejected it as a legitimate instrument and disagreed with the dehumanization of the loved traditional guitar. This is where we finally get into the genre in hand, folk rock. Despite the many people that had issues with this introduction of the electric guitar, Bob Dylan fully embraced the changing times and decided to go electric at a festival in 1965. This was a bold move in his musical career because so many people were unsure about it. However, it definitely paid off, as it brought us the genre we know today. Not only did Dylan thrive in these decades, but he is still widely recognised now and won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016 for his work. Dylan went on to inspire the duo Simon and Garfunkel to continue the trend of this expanding genre. The release of The Sounds of Silence was greatly received, as they blended together folk traditions beautifully with the rock melodies and poetic lyrics. By bringing together these genres and intertwining them with the pop culture of the time, these musicians, as well as others including Mamas and Papas and the Byrds, were able to appeal to wider audiences and reflect their political and cultural views in the way that would be heard. This particular point in the development of the genre was heavily influenced by the Cold War, that had a large impact on popular culture as well as on the whole of America and the UK to a certain extent. Musicians within this folk rock community wrote many songs that focused on the anger that arose predominantly against the military for their aggressive behaviour and extensive use of weaponry. This music allowed not only the musicians to express their opinions and feelings towards the circumstances, but also allowed society to relate to the music and altogether gain confidence in standing up for what they believe in. Although the past 20 years has seen the rise of many different genres like hip-hop, heavy metal and dance music that bring in different styles and the forever developing technology, folk rock is still found in pop culture. One of the most recognised being Mumford & Sons. However, some would strongly disagree that they adhere to the conventions of the genre. Although they share the similar theme of agriculture in their music, the subjects tend to be more focused on love and despair, which some would argue prevents them being true to folk rock. Another aspect that makes them questionable is their social class. Although they give off the working class vibe, they are all in fact middle class men that are familiar with the wind and dine lifestyle. I personally believe that the purpose of folk rock is to take traditions and tie the modern and new world into them, so they can still classify themselves as folk rock, but less so folk. More prominent within the genre are Frank Turner and Jake Bugg. Frank Turner focuses a lot of his music on history, both geographically and within the arts, as seen as songs Balthazar and Presario and English Curse, which tend to be mostly acoustic, but some are filled out with electric instruments. Jake Bugg has a more modern focus on the genre, as his subjects tend to include drug-heavy parties and life growing up on a council estate that are played with a mixture of acoustic and electric bands, with the odd country and folk gem that is a country song. Modern audiences now relate to this music in the sense that it is something they are familiar with, and the amount of political unrest has left people looking for security in music. Themes surrounding the issues emerging with poverty and benefits are addressed in Jake Bugg's songs Two Fingers and Seen It All, as he has found himself feeling unsafe in his own home. Folk rock in the modern day allows musicians and audiences to focus on the cultural issues that the other upbeat and romance-based genres avoid. Instead of glazing over problems, it faces them with a harsh honesty. In conclusion, folk rock is a genre that has had a very clear journey and tends to relate back to the need of peace and camaraderie, while still providing a true depiction of cultural issues. Folk rock has moulded itself around the change of politics and technology in order to attract the contemporary audience of the time effectively, and altogether can be seen as the music of the people, without the element of romanticising regularly seen in other genres.